Carl Anderson, and I'm a member of the Canadian Naval Memorial Trust. I brought in a marine chronometer that was salvaged from a sinking freighter, the Belgian Soldier, a couple of hundred nautical miles east of Newfoundland in 1942. So the chronometer is 80 years old.
The Battle of the Atlantic was a fight for dominance over the North Atlantic Ocean, through which a constant stream of Allied provisions were conveyed under the protection of naval warships. From the onset of World War II, German U-boats were on a mission to disrupt and destroy the supply chain and relentlessly targeted the merchant navy. To add to the anxiety of the ever-present threat, sailors knew there would be little chance of aid were an attack to occur, as the longer a ship and its crew idled in the water, the more vulnerable everyone became. Despite the risk, many rescue missions did follow German assaults, and the heroism shown at sea would help bring 10,549 of the 12,000 merchant mariners home.
I'd like to welcome you, Carl, to Militaria, and you brought an interesting item for us today.
We have here a marine chronometer. A marine chronometer is an extremely precise clock used in navigating the ship. So it has some special features for being used at sea. And one is that the chronometer is able to move independently of the box that it's in. This way, the chronometer stays level when the ship rolls and pitches. There's a lock so that you can lock it in place if you're going to move it somewhere. There's a key here that's used to wind it. It had to be wound every 2 days.
And the need to have accurate time would be?
In order to navigate the ship, the navigator would take star sights or sun sights using a sextant, and he has to know exactly the time those observations were made. So the time is very important to be known exactly.
So there's an interesting story behind this particular chronometer.
This was installed in the Belgian Soldier, which was a freighter, traveling just off the Grand Banks of Newfoundland when it was struck by a torpedo from a German submarine.
The Belgian Soldier has an interesting story behind it because, again, it was owned by the Belgian government.
Yes, it was a British-built ship sold to Belgian Shipping Company and had been crossing the North Atlantic on several other convoys up to this point. The ultimate destination would have been the east coast of the U.S. to pick up more cargo and join another convoy eastbound to the United Kingdom.
So the essence of the convoys going back across the Atlantic, bringing supplies to basically the front.
Yes.
This was the lifeline between Europe and North America.
That's right. The trip from the UK back west took a couple of weeks with up to 80 ships in convoy. This was a constant shuttling back and forth.
And at this point, too, the German tactics of the U-boats were changing as well. The wolf packs are roaming the North Atlantic, and there's certainly areas across the North Atlantic which are danger zones. They were basically lying in wait. The Battle of the Atlantic is probably a signature theater of operations that went from 1939 to 1945. As we sit here in Nova Scotia, that makes a big difference because, again, literally the Battle of the Atlantic was fought right off our doorstep. So this chronographer has a very interesting provenance. You know the whole story from ship right through to present day. It was basically up to one person that actually saved this, right?
Yes. Commanding officer of Sackville detailed Gerald Kent, his navigator, to lead a boarding party on board the Belgian Soldier. And Gerald Kent, being a navigator, went straight to the navigation bridge. He made sure that the code books, the confidential books as they were called, were taken off because they hadn't been disposed of. Obviously, if they'd ever fallen into the hands of the enemy, would have been somewhat of a disaster. And him being a navigator, he recognized the value of this object here. I understand a sextant was salvaged as well, and a pair of binoculars.
The other interesting point is the fact that they actually were going out in a small whaling boat in the middle of the North Atlantic. You board a boat that's actually moving along to some degree, and to climb aboard it, grab it, and then come back out is more amazing than anything. They actually attempted to do that.
Yes. I mean, they took their lives in their hands. If one of the submarines that was in the area had decided to sink the Belgian Soldier, could have happened when they were on board. As it turns out, it wasn't until the next day. So the men in that whaler were really, they had their lives in their hands and successfully got back to Sackville, of course.
The other interesting part is that actually the crew on the Belgian Soldier, there was 60 people on that ship.
Yes, there was a large number of casualties because they were trying to launch lifeboats when the ship was still in motion, and that is nearly impossible to do that safely. So a lot of them lost their lives that way. The lifeboats were turned over. One actually got fouled up with the ship's propeller, which was partly out of the water, still turning, and it smashed the lifeboat, and the men that were in that boat drowned. All in all, it was tragic. There was one man left aboard. He was taken off by HMCS Sackville. There was another man in a lifeboat nearby, and he was also rescued.
I think the biggest takeaway in discussion is the fact that someone actually rowed out in the North Atlantic into a whaleboat to climb up the side of a ship that was still moving, pull that particular item out, and then live to tell its tale and bring it back and share that artifact years later. Thank you, Carl, for bringing this particularly interesting item. Obviously, it's technology, but it's old school technology we've seen today, but also the provenance of the story and how it relates back to the Sackville, which again is the only surviving corvette in the world.
Yes.
And the Sackville is basically Canada's naval memorial.
That's right, Canada's National Naval Memorial.
And this is displayed on the Sackville today?
We have had it in our display cases on board ship, also in the office on shore.
Thank you very much, Carl, for bringing it and also for highlighting the story of the Belgian Soldier and HMCS Sackville today.
Well, thank you for having me. Well, I think it's interesting that the chronometer remained in the possession of the navigator. Many years later, he donated it to the Canadian Naval Memorial Trust. So it's part of our collection of artifacts now, and the story has come full circle.